has spent a decade trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other.
She's everything that I always wanted in a president.
Nobody loves our Latino community and our Puerto Rican community more than I do.
Trump's been calling this country trash. So enough is enough.
Let us fight for this beautiful country we love.
Kamala, you're fired. Get out. Get out of here. You're fired. You're fired.
Hello and welcome to this special broadcast of the US presidential elections. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris made their final pitch ahead of the November 5 presidential poll, setting the stage for what promises to be one of the most divisive elections in US history. From Trump attacking top Democrats as the enemy from within to Harris's petty tyrant jab at her rival. Neither of the leaders held back their punches this election season. Today we try and analyze how who enters the White House this coming January could have a significant impact on US foreign policy. While Trump is expected to be guided by his America First principle and act as a disruptor-in-chief, a Kamala Harris presidency could signify continuity in several areas. However, neither are expected to soften their stance on tariffs. I'm now joined by Tim Roemer, former US ambassador to India and an authority on Indo-US ties. Ambassador Roemer, always a pleasure having you here on CNBC-TV18 and wishing you a very happy Diwali, first of all.
Happy Diwali. I'll be going to the State Department on Friday to celebrate with many Americans this great holiday.
Absolutely. That's great to hear, Ambassador Roemer. And, you know, I must tell you, we saw Diwali at the White House. You're going to celebrate Diwali at the State Department. We saw Ambassador Garcetti really shaking a leg at the Diwali party at the embassy. Looks like Indo-US ties are closer than ever before.
Well, they are close. I don't know if you can see the picture up here behind me. It's a picture of my 4 kids in India when we lived there when I was U.S. ambassador celebrating Holi. So there are many, many things to celebrate in terms of the United States-India relationship. I think the election is going to have a profound effect on the U.S. foreign policy. Mr. Trump, Vice President Harris bring very, very different perspectives to the policies, whether they be the Middle East, the Ukraine war, China, tariffs, and even U.S.-India policies. So there are stark differences here, and we're going to see what is going to happen on Election Day. There's a lot of excitement here in the United States. I just came from 3.5 days up in Ground Zero, up in Pennsylvania, campaigning in Pittsburgh and in the suburbs. So I feel the adrenaline and the excitement, and we'll see what happens next Tuesday.
Right. Now, speaking about the Middle East, how do you think the result of this election will impact U.S. approach to the war in the Middle East? Will the next U.S. president pull back or make the support to Israel more conditional?
Well, I just spoke on this topic at the World Summit for NDTV and talked about the Middle East and the policy going forward. As you know, and you're an astute follower of foreign policy, the United States is trying to create a new regional partnership and new geopolitical architecture in the Middle East based upon strength of Israel, normalization of ties with Saudi Arabia, the Abraham Accords, bringing in more moderate countries for security, and including countries like India that have so much at stake in the Middle East, from energy to remittances and the diaspora being up there with 9 million Indians, to peace and prosperity, to an economic corridor that India would like to build in there someday. The United States is trying to create this brand new architecture of regional security up there with many actors, including India. And the United States and India share some common principles about trying to get to that new architecture. One, we both have very good relationships with Israel. Two, we both want some kind of a two-state solution for the Palestinians and a ceasefire and release of hostages. And three, we both have huge economic interests in that area. Trump and Harris have different views on that. I think Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, is going to play out the election in the United States, see who he has to deal with before he comes to any kind of ceasefires, whether that's in Lebanon or whether that's in the Gaza Strip. And I think he's going to try to solidify the military gains politically and strategically before he sits down with a new president and sees what cards are on the table.
Right. I would like to ask you about China as well. Clearly, there was a major tariff war that was triggered by Donald Trump with China. The tariff regime hasn't changed. In fact, Biden has stepped up tariffs on several components and product lines when it comes to China. Do you expect the tariff war with China to intensify regardless of who's in the White House?
I do think that the policy differences with respect to China are more similar between a Trump and Harris presidency. There are some nuanced differences, and I can talk about those. But I think both, the Trump and the Harris presidencies see that the relationship with China is key. Neither one wants war. Neither one wants hostility. We both need a floor. Both administrations would need to see a floor, in stabilizing the relationship there. But we recognize, as well as that India recognizes, that there are certain economic issues and tariff issues and technology issues that are not going to change. I know India has been very aggressive and very, visionary here in trying to cut back on their reliance with China on technology and chips and manufacturing. The United States is doing the same thing. We are building, hundreds of new manufacturing facilities. So we manufacture our chips and create jobs and are not dependent on South Korea or Taiwan for those national security chips that go in refrigerators and fighter jets and aircraft carriers and drones. So that part of the national security strategy, I think, is going to be pretty consistent. I think Trump is talking about doubling tariffs on China. Probably Harris would continue what we have today. And there will continue to be differences in terms of, the United States is going to reach out and partner, as we have in the Quad, with India, with Japan, with Australia, with Indonesia, with the Philippines, with the ASEAN countries. How do we work together on peace and healthcare and stability and climate change to better the world with these other countries, rather than simply see it through the lens of, are you for or against China? That's not particularly the way we want to go forward.
Right. On the Russia-Ukraine war, we've heard from U.S. congressmen, especially people working very closely with the Republicans, that somehow they have been questioning how much the U.S. government is spending in supporting Ukraine. So do you get a sense that Donald Trump, if elected, may take a different stance on the Russia-Ukraine war?
I think this is where you're going to see one of the most stark and visible differences in foreign policy between the Harris administration or a Trump administration. I think you'd see Harris continue the Biden policies. How do we strengthen NATO and partnerships in the area? How do we work with Ukraine to protect their freedom and their sovereignty and their future? I think Mr. Trump sees this more through the lens of how much is this costing us purely in terms of taxpayer money, not in terms of the issues of freedom and prosperity and How far will Putin take this if he can conquer or incore into the sovereignty of Ukraine? Can he take this further? I know Poland, I know other countries are very concerned about Russia's aggressiveness in this part of the of the world, of the region. So this is an area, I think, where you could be saying a Trump presidency really push hard for some kind of a negotiation very, very quickly into his presidency. I think the Harris presidency would try to continue to bolster Zelensky and the Ukrainian people for more leverage, for more ability once they do get to a ceasefire and peace, to retain and regain more of the land in an equitable fashion that has been exchanged over the course of this brutal war.
Okay, when we speak about Taiwan, there has been a worry over the last 2 years that Taiwan could become the next flashpoint, and China is watching what's happening in Ukraine very, very closely. Is that going to be a priority area to make sure that U.S. interests in Taiwan, in the Taiwan Strait, are not harmed by China?
Well, this is certainly something that we agree with most of the world. We do have some sense of strategic ambiguity with respect to our policy with Taiwan. China doesn't know exactly, what the United States would do or how we would react. Would we send troops? Would we send weaponry? What would we do in terms of a reaction to a China attack? We all know, and we've discussed this around the world, that if China did, do something to affect the sovereignty of the people of Taiwan, there would be massive economic implications for the entire world. We're talking about 10 times what has happened in Ukraine. Energy prices, trade prices, tariffs, everything would be affected by this, with about 65% of trade going through the Malacca Straits these days. So this would be devastating for India. This would be absolutely horrific for the world economy, for energy prices. We do not want this to happen. We're also doing some things proactively in the United States to bolster Taiwan's defense, trying to work with them ahead of time and proactively. What kinds of weapon systems do they need? What kinds of battle reinforcements do they need? What would China be likely to do so that we prevent China from attacking Taiwan in the first place? And do this proactively and in a preventive fashion, and not simply talk about the consequences of what horrific things would happen if some kind of attack took place on Taiwan. Let's try to prevent that going forward.
Right. So clearly that will be a priority for the United States. Thank you very much, Ambassador Roemer, for joining us. Always a pleasure having you here on CNBC TV18. And we hope to have you again soon on the election verdict, if things are clear, come the 5th of November. Thank you once again for being with us. We're slipping into a short break here on CNBC TV18. But who will Indian Americans pick, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? We will try to decode that on the other side with Milan, Vaishnav. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's now get you the mood of the Indian American voter in this US election. We're discussing the Indian American Attitude Survey by the Carnegie Endowment Center, and we're joined by Milan Vaishnav, the Senior Fellow and Director of the South Asia Program at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thank you very much, Milan, for joining us. Let me begin by asking you about the Indian Americans. How committed are they still to the Democratic Party? The survey says that attachment has declined. By how much and why?
Thanks so much for having me. I should just say from the outset that the survey that we have just completed is a nationally representative survey of Indian American citizens, those Indian residents residing in the United States who are eligible to vote. And this is a follow-up to something we did 4 years ago, which allows us to look at a trend over time. What we find is, as opposed to 2020, when close to 60% of Indian Americans identified with the Democratic Party, that has come down almost to 50% now. So almost by 10 percentage points in terms of their party identification. And that's, I think, a pretty significant shift. And so we're seeing more people declare themselves as independents or as associating with the Republican Party.
Right. In terms of the numbers and the people you surveyed, does the presence of Kamala Harris on the ballot excite Indian American voters? Does it attract more undecided Indian Americans in favor of the Democrats?
Well, it's an interesting question, because when we ask that question, we find that almost 1 in 2 Indian Americans say yes. Harris's presence at the top of the Democratic ticket does make them more enthusiastic about voting for the Democrats on Election Day. But if you look at the overall picture, there has been, again, in line with the numbers I just mentioned on party identification, about an 8 or 9 percentage point shift from Biden in 2020 to Harris today. So those Democratic numbers have come down, and the numbers for Trump have correspondingly gone up, right? So Indian Americans still overwhelmingly favor the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris. But that margin has come down from, say, about 70-20 to 60-30.
That is indeed very significant. Now, when we speak about gender gap in voting preferences among Indian Americans, what did your survey really point out?
This, I think, is one of the most interesting findings, right? We have never seen evidence of a gender gap in the Indian American population. That if you look at surveys that have been done of this community, like ours, if you look at broader surveys of Asian Americans that go back, now 15, 16 years, men and women more or less broadly agree when it comes to their voting habits. This is the first time that we've picked up a pretty significant gender gap. Women are much more supportive of Kamala Harris than men are. I should say that a majority of men still plan to vote for her, but 67% of Indian American women plan to pull the lever on Election Day for Kamala Harris, as opposed to just 53% of men. When you look into that statistic, that divergence more closely, what you find is that this movement from men away from the Democrats towards Republicans is almost entirely driven by younger men who are below the age of 40, specifically U.S.-born young men under the age of 40. And that is something that we're actually seeing across ethnic and racial groups. If you look at Black community voting, if you look at surveys of Hispanics, you're also seeing that younger men are showing more positively for Donald Trump.
So younger Indian Americans, those born in the United States, are showing a preference for Donald Trump, according to your survey. I would also like to ask you about key issues for Indian American voters. Abortion, you said, is one of the issues which really tops the list.
Yeah, I mean, I think unsurprisingly, the number one issue is inflation, right? I mean, this is a global phenomenon. It's true in India. It's been true in Europe. It's true in the United States. Voters don't like when they go to the grocery store or when they fill up their cars with gasoline to see high prices. And that's something that has become a kind of systemic reality across societies, right? And the U.S. has certainly been no stranger to that. But right below that, in fact, tied for number 2 with just the general state of the economy, is the question of abortion and reproductive rights. And in fact, that is something that particularly energizes women and Democratic voters. Now, again, if I were to tell you this broadly about the American population, it probably wouldn't surprise you. But it is striking to me that this has become a salient top-tier issue for Indian Americans, because that's a new phenomenon. That is nothing that has something that hasn't showed up on previous surveys.
In terms of immigration, we've seen some very strong rhetoric in this election, especially from Donald Trump, when he refers to immigrants as people who will enter your country illegally, they will eat your cats and dogs, things like that. Does that really turn off the Indian American population? Is this something that's hurting the sentiments?
Well, I would say, look, by and large, there are structural factors that I think put a ceiling on the extent to which Indian Americans are going to shift rightwards to the Republican Party. When you ask Indian Americans who don't associate with the Republican Party, why is it that you don't identify as a Republican? Very much at the top of the list is this belief that, look, fundamentally, this avatar of the Republican Party is anti-minority, right? And that extends not just to illegal, undocumented immigrants, but as well as, they are opponents of legal migration. Now, I will say that if you look at it the other way, that is, who are those Indian Americans who are choosing to vote for Donald Trump? The number one issue that they come back with is that they are upset with the Democratic Party's stance on illegal immigration. They find them to be too soft, too weak, right? Which again is something that we're seeing in other communities, whether it's the Black community, the Hispanic community, and the Asian American community at large, that they're supporters of immigration, but they're quite upset by what they see as people who wish to circumvent the rules.
Right. Very important and very interesting findings, especially about the decline in the number of Indian Americans who have an attachment with the Democrats, and how some of the numbers there have shifted to the Republicans, though a small number, but yet very, very significant. Thank you very much, Milan, Vaishnav, for joining us with the findings of that very important Indian American attitude survey, how the Indian American is actually thinking in this election. You can find more of that on our website, CNBC-TV18.com as well. On that note, we come to the end of this special broadcast, but through the week, we will be getting you more newsmakers and special insights into the US election and what this means for India-US ties going forward as well. So keep tuning in. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.